Jolly Snow. It was cold and grey outside. Jolly Tall, the giraffe, had been gazing out of the window for days. "What are you waiting for?" asked Rabbit. "I'm waiting for it to snow," said Jolly. "It's winter, isn't it?" "It doesn't always snow in winter," said Rabbit. "In fact, it hardly ever does," said Duck gloomily. "I know where there's some snow," said Little Bear. "It must be left over from last winter. I'll get it for you." Without waiting to explain, Little Bear rushed out of the room. In a moment he was back again, carrying a large glass bubble. Inside the bubble they could see a little house and a tree covered in a layer of tiny white snowflakes. "Is that all snow does?" asked Jolly, staring into the bubble. "Does it just lie around making things whiter than usual?" "Of course not," said Little Bear. "That wouldn't be any fun. You can make it into balls and throw it. Or slide on it," said Zebra. "And jump into heaps of it," said Rabbit. "And make footprints." "You can build things with it too," said Duck. "Goodness," said Jolly, "there doesn't look enough of it for that." Holding the glass bubble tightly, Little Bear jumped up and down. A flurry of snowflakes leapt from the tiny house and tree and rushed around inside the glass. "Look at it now!" he squeaked. "There's still not enough to make a snowball," said Jolly. "And anyway, you can't get it out," said Duck. "Wait a minute," said Zebra. "I know where there's lots of snow." She led the way to the kitchen, where Bramwell Brown was busy making some special biscuits. To stop the biscuit dough sticking to the rolling pin, he was shaking flour from a flour shaker. "Whoopee!" cried Zebra, dashing under the falling flour. "I'm in a snowstorm!" In no time at all, her black stripes had almost disappeared. Rabbit tried to gather up a pawful of the flour. "It's not very good for snowballs," he said. "It doesn't stick together." "But it's perfect for dough balls!" cried Little Bear, rolling up a piece of dough and throwing it at Rabbit. The dough ball stuck to Rabbit's bottom and looked like an extra tail. "This flour snow doesn't come off," said Zebra, jumping up and down trying to shake herself clean. "I think you are going to need a bath," said Bramwell. He filled a dish with soapy water, and the snowy Zebra climbed in. She began to splash about, sending bubbles flying everywhere. "It's still not coming off," she grumbled. "It just gets stickier and stickier." "Flour and water make a sort of glue," said Duck. "You'll probably have to stay white forever." "No, you won't," said Bramwell kindly. "We'll get you clean." All the scrubbing and splashing made even more bubbles. "Snow bubbles!" cried Little Bear, jumping about, popping them with his paws. "Hurry up, Zebra! We want to use your bath as a snow machine." After lots of rubbing and scrubbing, Zebra's stripes at last reappeared. The others wrapped her in a warm towel and looked into the bath. "What have you done with all the bubbles?" asked Little Bear. "Bubbles never last," said Duck. "And anyway, they would have made very sloppy snow. Why don't we go and see if Old Bear has any ideas?" Old Bear was in the dining room, cutting out paper decorations. He'd made paper stars, paper bells, and paper lanterns. He'd even made paper snowflakes. "You can't really play with these," said Little Bear, trying to slide on a snowflake. "No, you can't," said Old Bear, rescuing his decoration. "They're only meant for looking at." "We want some snow for Jolly," said Rabbit. "Snow you can play with." "What about these?" said Old Bear, scattering a blizzard of paper pieces in the air. "Lovely," said Rabbit. "And nice and slippery too," said Little Bear, taking a run at a heap of them and skidding along on his bottom. "What we need is a sledge," said Rabbit, "or Little Bear will wear out his trousers." He fetched a cardboard box, and Bramwell cut away the sides. Duck tied a string to the front, and they pulled it along to test it. "Now, if we had a slope," said Rabbit, "we could whiz down it in the sledge." "I don't think I could," said Jolly. "I wouldn't fit in it." "Never mind," said Bramwell. You can help with the slope." Bramwell Brown disappeared into the bedroom and came back pulling a large white sheet. He gave a corner to Jolly. "Now," said Bramwell, "when the others climb on, lift up your end, and they should slide all the way down." Rabbit and Little Bear pushed the sledge onto the sheet and climbed in. "There's only room for 2, said Rabbit. "Don't worry," said Zebra. "I'll slide on my tummy." As soon as they were ready, Little Bear called out to Jolly, "1, 2, 3, go!" Jolly and Bramwell lifted their end of the sheet. Nothing happened. "Wobble it a bit," called Rabbit. "We seem to be stuck." Jolly and Bramwell shook the sheet as hard as they could, and suddenly the toys found themselves sliding very fast to the other end. "Look out!" cried Little Bear, as the sledge whizzed off the sheet across the room and crashed into the wall on the other side. "I think we need a softer landing," said Rabbit, fluffing up his flattened fur and helping Little Bear to his feet. He piled up a heap of cushions against the wall, and then all 3 toys bravely climbed back onto the sheet. "Ready, steady, go!" they called to Jolly. Up went the sheet. Down went the toys, straight into the heap of cushions. As they landed, clouds of feathers puffed out of a little hole in one of the cushions and filled the room. "Look, it's feather snow!" cried Little Bear, making the hole bigger with his paw and jumping on the cushion to make more feathers escape. Very soon, all the toys were jumping in the feathers. They rolled in them, crawled through them, and piled them in heaps. "Is this like snow?" asked Jolly. "It's better," said Little Bear. "It doesn't melt, and it doesn't make you cold." "Let's put some round the windows," suggested Rabbit. "Then it will look as if real snow has settled there." He climbed up to the windowsill and began to pile feathers in each corner. When he reached the 3rd window pane, he stopped and looked, then looked again. "Somebody has already done this one," he called to the others. The window did have a white covering around the edges, but it was on the outside. "It isn't feathers," cried Little Bear excitedly. "It's real snow." All the toys crowded onto the sill and stared out of the window in amazement. "Now we can play outside," said Zebra. "Well, actually it looks a bit deep for me," said Little Bear. "And a bit cold for me," said Old Bear. At that moment, Bramwell Brown came into the room, carrying a huge plateful of his special snowflake biscuits. "I think what you need is some of my snow," he said. Jolly Tall thought about the flour snow and the feather snow, the bubble snow and the paper snow. Then he looked at the real snow floating down outside. "I really like all kinds of snow," he announced. "But," he added, munching a snowflake biscuit, "Bramwell's snow is probably the snow I like best." The Bedtime Pony. He doesn't do much in the daytime, and I can't take him outside. Though he's a sort of pony, he's too small for me to ride. His stuffing's rather lumpy in his hooves and in his head, but he's always waiting for me when I snuggle up in bed. He's not the sort of pony who can walk or pull a cart, and no one dares to wash him just in case he falls apart. His coat is rather faded, all the pink bits should be red, but he's always there beside me when I'm sleeping in my bed. Mr. Brown and the Baby Bear. Mr. and Mrs. Brown were teddy bears. They lived in a little cupboard in the playroom. They had furnished the cupboard home themselves with things that Mr. Brown had found while out walking. He'd brought back acorns for them to use as cups, and soft feathers that he'd found near the duck pond to stuff cushions with. He'd made mirrors from old milk bottle tops and a broom from twigs that he'd collected. All their tables were made from little boxes. In fact, their cupboard was cluttered with the bits and pieces that he'd collected, and one day Mrs. Brown decided that it was full enough. "If you go out today," she said to Mr. Brown, "then you are not to come back with anything. I shall check that your paws are empty when you walk in that door." Mr. Brown hugged her as usual and set off out of the cupboard, across the room, down the stairs, and out into the garden. It was a lovely autumn day, and a carpet of leaves covered the lawn. Mr. Brown thought it was great fun crunching through the leaves. He found some especially interesting ones, which he thought of taking home, but remembering Mrs. Brown's warning, he left them where they were. "It's a pity," he said. "I'm sure I could have made something with them." A little further down the garden, he found a bright, shiny brown conker. "Oh, what a beauty!" he said to himself, as he bent down to polish the gleaming nut with his paw. The case it came out of must have been huge. And then he saw it. The biggest, most perfect conker case he'd ever seen. The inside was silken smooth and white, and shaped like a round-bottomed bowl. The outside was hard and covered in prickles. "I'm sure I could put something in it," said Mr. Brown. But he remembered Mrs. Brown and sadly left it where it was. Mr. Brown continued down the garden until he came to the fence at the end. He was just about to turn and go back to the house when he saw a heap of leaves. They'd been raked up the day before and piled against the fence. Mr. Brown gazed at the heap and sighed. There was one thing he'd always wanted to do, and that was to jump right into the middle of a heap of dry, crunchy autumn leaves. "Shall I?" he thought to himself, "just to see what it's like, to see whether it's soft or crunchy or bouncy. I must find out." And, looking round to make sure nobody was watching, he climbed up on the fence above the leaves. "1, 2, 3, he said out loud, and then he jumped. It was wonderful. The leaves were all crispy, and they crackled softly as he sank gently down, down, down into the springy heap. And then, when he'd stopped sinking into the leaves, Mr. Brown heard a sound. Someone, or something, very near him said, "Ow!" "Well, that wasn't me," said Mr. Brown. "I'm not hurt."
"Well, I am,"
said a little muffled voice.
"You're sitting on me."
Mr. Brown jumped to his feet, and pushing his paw deep into the leaves, he pulled out the smallest teddy bear you've ever seen. "Goodness," said Mr. Brown, "it's Toby Small. How did you get in there?"
"Somebody took me for a walk and dropped me," said Toby Small. "And then I was raked up with the leaves. I've been here all night and I'm cold and hungry."
"Well, Toby," said Mr. Brown, "I shall take you back to your house this afternoon. But first, I think I'd better take you home to Mrs. Brown so you can have the leaves brushed out of your fur." So Mr. Brown picked up the little bear and carried him back to the house. On the way, he stopped to collect the big conker case that he'd found. He had an idea now how he could use it without making Mrs. Brown cross. Mrs. Brown was waiting at the door of the cupboard when he arrived back. "Now," she said to Mr. Brown when she saw the conker case in his paws, "take that straight back to the garden. We don't need it." But we do," said Mr. Brown, and he put down the conker case so that Mrs. Brown could see inside it. There, lying fast asleep in the soft, smooth white bed, was Toby Small. He was tucked up with sheets made from the brightest autumn leaves, and he was smiling happily. "Oh," said Mrs. Brown softly, "I see. You couldn't really leave him outside, could you?" And she carried the sleeping bear in his conker cot into the little cupboard house. When Toby Small had had a sleep and a meal, and his fur was brushed free of leaves, Mr. and Mrs. Brown took him home. And after that, He came to stay with them for his holidays, and they kept the conker case for him to sleep in. Gradually, the cupboard house became more and more cluttered with things that Mr. Brown brought home from his walks. But Mrs. Brown never complained. "We must have something for Toby Small to play with when he comes to stay," she would say. And Mr. Brown just smiled. Spotty Ben. Ben saw his own reflection in the mirror on the wall. "I seem to be all spotty. I can't be well at all." "It's all right," laughed the other toys. "None of your spots are new. You've always had a spotty coat. That's how we know it's you." The Christmas Fancy Dress Party. The Christmas holiday seemed to be a time for the new toys. All the old ones found themselves sitting upstairs with nobody to play with. "It's not very exciting, is it?" said Mo the mohair bear, as he paced up and down the playroom. "Well, we could do something exciting," said Old Bear. "Let's have a fancy dress competition, a Christmas one." "That's a good idea," said Rosie and Fluff, two very small bears. "We know what we could dress up as." Whispering and laughing, they rushed off into a corner to plan their costumes. Soon all the toys were busy finding, making, or trying on their fancy dress costumes. They were all very excited. "I'm going to dress up as a king," said Mo. "I can just imagine myself in a beautiful crown." "Where will you get a crown?" asked Little Bear. "I shall pull a cracker," said Mo. "They always have paper crowns inside." Old Bear and Little Bear settled themselves down in a chair to judge the competition. Rosie and Fluff had left the room to fetch something. "They said they wouldn't be long," said Old Bear. "When they come back, we'll start the judging." Looking round the room, he didn't recognize any of his friends anymore. They were all in disguise. "They do look good costumes," he said. "It's going to be very hard to judge the best." Everyone was eager to get started, and still Rosie and Fluff weren't back. "I think we'd better begin without them," said Little Bear. "They might be ages." Bramble Brown was the first to be judged. He had rolled himself up in a piece of paper and was lying on the floor. "What are you meant to be?" asked Old Bear. "Bang," said Bramble Brown. "I think it's an exploding sausage," said Little Bear. "Bang," said Bramble Brown even louder. "I know," said Mo. "It's a Christmas cracker." "Oh, well done," said Old Bear. "I can see it is now. What a clever idea." King Mo was next. He marched in front of the judges with his cracker crown on and a king's robe made from a piece of red crepe paper. He looked very smart indeed, and everyone cheered. The next thing to shuffle in front of the judges seemed to be a walking paper chain. It moved along like a brightly coloured rustling snake. "It seems to be a paper chain that can walk," said Little Bear, "but I can't see who's under it." "It's us! It's us!" cried the little yellow bears, Marigold and Buttercup. "We knew you'd never see us." The paper chain suddenly tripped over its paws and ended up a heap of bears and paper. Marigold and Buttercup grinned at the judges from under the heap. "We're a paper chain that's fallen down now," said Marigold. "They do, you know, sometimes." "Of course they do," said Old Bear. "That's very good." While everyone was busy clapping the fallen paper chain, in jumped Rabbit. He was covered in white cotton wool and had a carrot tied over his nose. "Oh, look!" cried Little Bear. "A white rabbit." "I'm not a white rabbit," said Rabbit crossly. "That wouldn't be Christmassy. I'm a snowman." "Well, a snow rabbit then," said Little Bear. "You've left your ears sticking up," Snowmen don't have long ears. Old Bear fetched a woolly hat, and, tucking Rabbit's ears inside it, popped it over the Snow Rabbit's head. "There," he said, "you look wonderful now, Rabbit." While the toys were admiring Rabbit, the door opened and something prickly came in. "What is it?" said King Mo. "It looks like a holly bush." But when they looked closer, the toys could see that inside the bush were 2 pairs of eyes. "It's Rosie and Fluff," said Old Bear. "But what are you supposed to be?" "We're holly bears," said Rosie proudly. "What are holly bears?" asked Rabbit, not sure whether he should know. "Oh, you know," said Fluff. "There's a Christmas song called The Holly and the Ivy, and it's got a bit in it all about holly bears. I don't know what they look like, but they must be something like this." And with that the whole holly-covered pair of bears did a little twirl to show off its disguise. "Well, if holly bears look like a bush, then you've done very well," said Old Bear. When everyone had clapped the holly bears, Old Bear and Little Bear discussed the winners. "We really think," said Old Bear, "that you've all done so well you should all win something. But what can the prize be?" "A crown!" shouted Rosie. "In the Holly Bears song it says something like, 'The holly bears the crown.'" "Oh, I remember," said King Mo, "and I know how we can all have a prize and a crown." "How?" asked the others. "Crackers," said Mo. On the table in the room had been a whole box of crackers. Mo had only used one to get the crown for his king costume. It had been a box of 10 crackers, and there were 9 left. And so they all won prizes for their costumes, and they all felt very much jollier in their paper party hats. There were even enough crackers for the judges to have one each, and they did deserve them, didn't they? Peter and the Pumpkin Bear. Peter Bear sat in his usual place on the windowsill, looking out at the people walking by. Everyone knew Peter was there, and every now and then someone would come close to the window and talk to him through the glass. Peter loved all the attention. He would stay there for most of the day, and was never lonely for a minute. Today was a special day. It was the last day in October, Halloween. And lots of people stopped to tell Peter about their exciting plans for parties that night. Before long, Peter saw the 2 children who lived with him coming home from school. They were each carrying a fat, bright orange pumpkin. Peter thought these might be to eat, but the children had other ideas. "Look, Peter," they cried, rushing into the house. "We're going to make faces with these and put candles inside." While Peter watched with excitement, they carefully cut off the top of one of the pumpkins. Then they began to dig out the middle with the spoon. "That looks fun," thought Peter. But when the children cut a face for their pumpkin, Peter changed his mind. He could hardly bear to look. The horrible, cross monster face had staring eyes and gappy teeth in a wicked sort of grin. The children were delighted, but Peter put his paws over his eyes. With the help of their parents, the children put a candle inside the pumpkin head and lit it. Straight away, the pumpkin face shone with a fiery red glow. It looked even more frightening now, and seemed to stare at Peter. When the children put it on the windowsill, it glared out at the people walking by, and nobody dared to come near the window. When everyone had left the room, Peter peeped out from behind his paws. "What can I do?" he said. "With that thing there frightening everyone, nobody will come over to talk to me." He crept over to blow out the candle, but thought the children would be cross with him if he did that. And then he saw the other unused pumpkin. and an idea came to him. Using the knife and spoon the children had used, he cut the top off the spare pumpkin and hollowed out the middle. Then he began to cut a face in his pumpkin, but his pumpkin face was a happy, friendly face. In fact, it was the face of a smiling teddy bear. Peter carried the finished pumpkin to the windowsill and put it down carefully beside the monster face. Then, as he knew he shouldn't use a candle in case he burnt his paws, he fetched a torch to put inside his pumpkin bear. Straight away it smiled out with a warm orange glow, and the people walking by were so surprised to see a friendly bear face that they came over to take a closer look. All Peter's friends arrived to talk to him about his pumpkin, and they took no notice of the monster face at all. In fact, so many people liked Peter's idea that they all made pumpkin bears too, and it turned out to be the most unfrightening Halloween anyone had ever known. Polly and the Warm Snowman. There had not been a single flake of snow all winter. Almost every morning the toys had crowded eagerly onto the windowsill, hoping to look out onto a snow-covered garden. Some of the newer toys had never seen snow, and they were just beginning to wonder whether perhaps it didn't really exist. And then, one morning, there it was, a thick blanket of snow over everything. They woke up and wondered why it was so quiet. There were no footsteps on the path or wheels on the road. Even the birds were too busy keeping warm to sing. The toys almost fell off the windowsill. They were so excited. "We'll build a snowman!" they shouted, and all rushed to the door and tumbled into the garden in a heap. It was then that they realized just how deep the snow was. Only the tallest teddy bears with the longest legs could actually walk about. Most of the others had disappeared completely. "Oh dear," said the muffled voice of Polly, a particularly small bear. "I can't move at all. The snow is so deep it comes up to my ears." The others helped to pull her out, and then Freddie the teddy fetched a tea tray from the kitchen. All the smaller toys clambered onto the tray and were towed across the snow-covered lawn by the bigger ones. They walked round and round the garden until they found a place that looked just right for their snowman, and then they set to work. Freddie and the other big bears made a snowball and began to roll it across the garden. As it rolled, it picked up more and more snow, and left a trail behind it of bare grass, just like a wiggly green path. The small bears were very pleased to see this, and leaving their tea-tray sledge, they ran along the green path and helped the big bears push the heavy snowball. After a while, the snowball was large enough to be the body of the snowman. "We need a head now," said Polly, and began to pat a snowball into shape with her paws. They rolled this one right round the lawn, making a big O-shaped path, and arrived back at the snowman's body with a snowball big enough to be his head. "How are we going to get it up on top of the body?" asked Freddie. "Even I can't reach." But Polly had a plan. "We've got the tea tray," she said. "We'll roll the snowball head onto the tray and pull it up with a rope. It shouldn't be too difficult." They all rolled the snowman's head onto the tray and threaded a skipping rope through the handles. Then the strongest bears climbed up to the top of the snowman's body with the ends of the rope and pulled. Slowly the tea tray, with the snowball head on it, rose into the air until it was level with the bears. "It's up! We've done it!" shouted Freddie, and he rolled the head neatly into place. The toys down below cheered and jumped up and down with excitement. "He needs a face," called one little bear. The tea tray was lowered down, and some of the toys went off to fetch coal for the snowman's eyes, a carrot for his nose, and twigs for his mouth and eyebrows. Very soon the snowman was smiling down at them, with his twiggy mouth and his shining coal-black eyes. Before Freddy climbed down, he took off his own stripy scarf and tied it round the neck of the snowman. "He looks lovely," said Polly. "We'll keep him for ever and ever and come and play with him every day." They spent the whole afternoon in the garden, throwing snowballs, making slopes out of snow and sliding down them on the tray. When it began to get dark, they said good night to the snowman and went indoors to bed. The next morning the sun was shining brightly, and the toys couldn't wait to get outside. But when they opened the door, they all stopped and stared. "Somebody's stolen our snowman!" cried Freddy. It seemed to be true. The lovely snowman had vanished. Then Polly noticed something lying on the ground. "But they left behind the carrot nose," she said. "And the coal eyes," added Freddy, "and my scarf." And then they realized what had happened to their snowman. He hadn't been stolen. He'd melted. What's more, the snow had almost gone too. There wasn't enough to build another snowman. Feeling very sad, the toys began to play with the last of the snow. But the sun was quite warm now, and even the last of the snow was melting fast. Polly had an idea and went indoors again. The others could see her sitting by the window, knitting. She looked up and waved every now and again, but she seemed very busy. By the end of the day, the grass was as green as it was in summer. The only snow left was in the shady bit under the tree. The toys gave up trying to make things with the snow and trooped indoors. "It's nearly spring now," said Freddy to Polly, when he found her sitting by the fire. "I don't think it'll snow again this winter, so we won't be able to make another snowman for a whole year." "No," said Polly, "but I have a surprise for you, Freddy." And she pointed to a corner of the room. In soft white wool with black eyes and a carrot-shaped nose stood a little knitted snowman. He was smiling at Freddy and was wearing a knitted hat and scarf just like Freddy's own. "He's a warm snowman, Freddy. I knitted him myself. The outdoor snowman may have melted, but this one never will. We can play with him all year," said Freddy. "Oh, Polly, you are clever." And holding one white arm each, they led the little warm snowman out of the room to show all the other toys. Of course, he never melted. In fact, he's still there to this day.